Video games need to be cheaper to buy is the title of a Bloomberger didn't say that on purpose, guys. Anyway, Bloomberg article that is getting a lot of traction. I'm seeing this talked about all over the place, and I want to get into the actual numbers on prices of games in this video and actually think about it, because obviously it's easy to make a video that's just like, yeah, video games should be cheaper, and my video game playing audience is obviously going to like to hear that. But what kind of impact would that actually have on the industry? Does that make sense? And what do the numbers actually say? Because obviously we could just be like, yeah, video games should be free, all of them, except I don't want microtransactions either. So, but then obviously the video game industry collapses. We don't get games other than what people want to just make for fun in their free time, but they can't do it full time because, again, video games are going to be free. So obviously we need to rein in our wants with like, okay, does the data actually say anything industry-wide or interesting about the price of video games and their success, how much revenue they can generate, that kind of a thing? And what spurred this particular article to be made in the first place? It looks like a lot of this was based on the fact that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was apparently developed for less than $10 million and yet looks as good as games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, reviewed better than all of them last year. And so when the author of this article was at DICE, executives were discussing games and the industry in general, and there was a lot going on with the reaction to Clair Obscur. It cost very little to make, made tons of money. It looks like it sold over 6 million copies at this point, and again, reviewed super well. And one of the things, obviously there's a lot more that went into its success than its launch price, but it did launch at $50, which is less than the current $70 traditional price, with some games trying to push into the $80 price category like Mario Kart World. And even on Steam, there was a release discount for like $40. So a game like Clair Obscur Expedition 33 launching for $40 to $50, and I think you can even play it for free. I don't think they mentioned that here. Well, free if you're already on Game Pass, but at least with your Game Pass subscription, that kind of thing. Yet still managing to sell 6 million copies on top of that. So how many other people actually just played it through that kind of service? So this was a major shakeup in their discussions, and there's some real talk about the price of video games. Now, one thing that's just interesting to look at is we do have the price of games like the $80 price point, and we do have this. So this is the inflation adjust. And I'll be clear, I didn't make this graphic. I found it on Reddit, but it does look correct, and they're crediting fred.stlouisfred.org for this chart. Anyway, all my sources for anything I do will be in the video description here. And if we look at this is the inflation-adjusted Mario Kart prices over the years. And it's kind of interesting because I'm old enough to have played the original Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo a lot growing up. You know, my neighbors next door had it. You know, there'd be tons of playing on the weekends, who can win. I played the battle mode, all of that. Then we had Mario Kart 64, etc., the various, mobile versions. And again, adjusted for inflation, you could be like, well, $80 doesn't seem that bad. But of course, it does feel kind of bad, though, right? Because, there's been a lot going on with game pricing. In fact, if we look at rather than just looking at Mario Kart specifically, now this is only going up through 2020 that I could find here, but this is an Ars Technica article discussing the $70 price point for video games. That is kind of the world that we're living in now, but they gathered this research as we were kind of heading into that. So this kind of tops out in 2020, but I mean, I think it shows the overall trend. So one thing was, why were old games so expensive? I mean, cartridges were a lot more expensive than discs. That's one thing. So when you look at those inflation-adjusted prices for those old, cartridge-based games, I think that does factor something into it. So if you look at, again, not just Mario Kart, but cartridge-based games, first of all, there's the nominal dollars, meaning how much did they actually cost on the actual box? And, $35 to $40 was pretty normal in the 80s. Going into the 90s, $60 to even $70 wasn't unheard of. on the actual nominal price on the box. And what I think is important to note here is that as we shifted towards discs and things, dropping into the, $50-ish range, I was, again, alive for all of this time. I was a gamer during this whole period. And yeah, $50 for a game was pretty normal. And then they jumped up to 60, and that was pretty standard. Now, if you do adjust for inflation, though, this does look kind of different, right? Where it's actually a downward trend adjusted for inflation. So from the perspective of the businesses, it certainly feels like, they're getting less, actual, money per unit, if you think about it that way. But I also think it's important to think about, so a lot of factors that go into video game pricing, because there's the, like I said, when it was actual cartridges and things like that you were paying for, like that was, there's a lot of actual expense in producing the video game, sending it out to market. And then when it shifted to discs, a lot of that cost drops. And now we're in a world, I'd argue, where a large percentage, if not all of it though, seriously, discs still sell a bit, well, not just a bit, but probably quite a bit. In the console market. In the PC side, though, we're pretty much entirely onto digital distribution, where sure, Steam takes their cut. What is it, 30% now, I think, being pretty standard on a lot of places. So a 30% cut going there, but the actual, manufacturing cost is pretty much nothing. Now, in the console side of thing, we do still have the disc, so there's that. But I think what can get lost when you look at just the price of the game is that what really matters a lot here is that if you sell more copies, you could sell more copies at a lower price, and then that more than makes up for it, right? And so as the gaming market grew, as more people played games, you could keep the price of the game flat, but your profits could go up if just the size of the market was growing. But while I didn't pull up an actual chart in time for today's video, the actual price, the actual market for games isn't growing all that much since like 2020. So if the size of the market isn't growing, but inflation does go up, then you start to have that pressure to price games higher. So you can see why, there's that wanting to, price things at $80 now from the game publishers. And from that perspective, it can make sense why they would want to do that and feel like that is fair to do that. But then there's the question. If you price the game too high, do you sell enough copies for it actually to make sense? Is there some sort of relationship between the price of a game and how much it actually ends up selling? Because if you think about it, like, let's think about some simple numbers. If you set the game at half the price, but that causes it to sell twice as many copies, you've essentially broken even from the perspective of the game publisher, right? And the investors in all of this. So, at what point does it make sense? Like, does dropping the game's price 20% actually get us, 40% better sales? So it's actually better for us to price it lower. And the hard thing here is you can't really A/B test this, because you can't launch the same exact game twice at two different prices into exactly the same markets. It just doesn't work that way. So this is a very difficult thing, I think, to actually gather really hard data on, which is basically, how does adjusting the price of a game at launch affect its overall revenue that it's able to produce? Because again, you could sell fewer copies, but at a higher price, and it's more than worth it to the publisher. But if you sell, set the price low enough, do you then sell so many more copies that's the better way to go about it? So I was trying to think about what sort of data set would even be interesting to look at here. And one thing that's interesting to me, at least from the PC side of things, because that's, where my channel is that Steam does actually post by revenue the top 100 games by revenue for 2025. Now, they don't list them in like first place to 100th place in order by revenue. They put them in groups. So the platinum group that you're seeing here, This is the top 12 games by revenue in 2025 for Steam. And one thing that we can see right now, because I'm on Steam, is the cost of those games right now. But I was also interested in their launch price. So for now, the top 12, you can kind of see what it would cost to buy them right now. We've got Oblivion Remastered. Again, this isn't necessarily number one. This just means it's in the top 12 in no particular order. Civ 7, Dune Awakening, Hollow Knight Silksong, Borderlands 4, Battlefield 6, Monster Hunter Wilds, Arc Raiders, Schedule 1, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Elden Ring Night Reign, and FC 26. The gold group, again, in no particular order, but we do know that this group is below this group. So this is the top 12. This is the next 12 down. Here we have, is that Digimon? I haven't heard Digimon in a long time. Am I wrong here? Is Digimon still going? I know Pokemon survived the 90s, but I didn't know Digimon did. Anyway, apparently that's in the top 24. Interesting. 13 through 24, again, sorted randomly. Doom the Dark Ages, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Stellar Blade, Anno 117, Europa Universalis 5, Dispatch, Split Fiction, Inzoi, not quite sure how to pronounce it, Dying Light the Beast, Claire Obscure Expedition 33 is in this group, and Call of Duty Black Ops 7. Then we get the silver category with a bunch of other titles here. I don't want to read through absolutely everything, but that's how they categorize this. Now, one thing I was then able to do that I thought would be interesting is take a good chunk of that group and then look at its launch day pricing. So what's making money? What kind of category does it fall into? Gold or high, platinum, silver high? And then looking at its launch day pricing. Now, we got this in a table here on the left, and then this kind of chart that we've made out of it, out of that table here. And when you just sort into like gold, platinum, and silver, I don't think there's any clear trend on like, the platinum group all was set at this price, right? I don't think it falls into that sort of a trend. Where I do think that we see a little bit more of a trend is actually if I sort by the price column. So if we sort by the price column, I think it's easier to make at least some sort of general conclusions. So we can see that in this group of, 25 of the highest selling games on Steam, and not just highest selling, it's important to note that this is revenue. So Steam would track like a free-to-play game, but getting revenue through microtransactions, that kind of thing, right? So we can see that, a bunch of the free-to-play games where I've set the launch day price as $0, we've got games like PUBG, Marvel Rivals, Apex Legends, Counter-Strike, Dota 2, Warframe. These games, we've got a couple of, we got a platinum, we got a silver, some gold, some golds here. So these are doing pretty well. And again, they're just free to play. But I feel like that's sort of its own class. The whole model of a game being free to play just really comes with its own set of, I think standards and targets and microtransactions, etc. So I think it's more fair to then look into the other, groups where you actually are paying something for the game up front. Now, the place where I think I'm seeing the biggest trend is that the $70 launches are all established AAA franchises where they can count on people to return to them, right? These aren't indie games. These aren't first games in a new IP. All of these $70 games did all end up in the platinum tier that I'm seeing here, and they were, like I said, big franchises. Battlefield 6, Monster Hunter Wilds, Borderlands 4, EA Sports FC 26, Civilization 7. So I think the data here suggests to me that big AAA sequels to major franchises can probably get away with a pretty high price point. And I'm not sure that they need to lower them. Now, what this doesn't tell us is would they have sold better if they had gone with a lower price? Because let's say you drop the price, 20%, would it actually have had 30% or 40% more sales? This data just doesn't tell us that. And again, you can't really get that data because you can't launch the same game with an A/B test where the only variable is price. So again, we can just look for, are we noticing any sorts of trend in the data? So I'm noticing that the only games that ended up platinum with a $70 price point were these big AAA sequels in big established franchises. Now, I'm noticing that we're seeing some platinum selling type games off of like $40 price points, though. So Arc Raiders, Elden Ring, Night Rain. So these are games that, I think it could have been tempting to price those at $50, $60, $70, but they didn't, and they performed well. They're still ending up in the platinum class by revenue. Again, we're also seeing like Dune Awakening, Elder Scrolls Remastered. These are $50 price point games. Again, ending up in the platinum tier. So one thing I would say is to get lots of revenue, you clearly don't have to price a game at $70. You can generate tons of revenue without pricing at $70. And I have a feeling, but again, it's just a feeling. We can't really A/B test it in the data set, that if a game like Arc Raiders had a $70 or $80 price point, I really doubt it would have been the runaway success that it has been. I think people are only going to be willing to spend so much money, especially on a game that might kind of feel live servicey and like, am I going to get microtransaction to death anyway, right? I think it was fairly brave to have a live service title not even be not be free to play in the first place, right? Elden Ring, Night Rain's kind of also in that group. With that type of game, Helldivers 2, also sort of in that thing where, again, I think the $40 price point is helping it survive, because I think if they had tried to go much higher, I think it could have been rough. Yeah, and I really do think that Clair Obscur Expedition 33, that kind of lower price point is hitting here. And another thing that's interesting, like I said, is these games like Repo, Schedule One, Hollow Knight Silksong. These are at $10, $20. I think that's pretty interesting there, because I think this really shows that, again, Hollow Knight Silksong hitting the platinum revenue tier, but with a $20 price point. Do you think that a game like this would have been able to generate platinum levels of revenue if they had priced it at $70 or $80? I really think not. Not because of the quality of the game not actually being worth it, but I just think it's going to be harder for these, indie type games to really break out. So when I'm looking at this data set, what I am really seeing is, I think that the type of game can really influence what kind of price that people are going to be, willing to pay for that, and that you can price a game low and still generate extremely high revenue. Game, like I said, Hollow Knight Silksong is showing that. Mugenics just launched recently, and all sales numbers seem to be pretty great. And again, the price is pretty reasonable. We're nowhere near even the $50 point, let alone $60, $70, or $80. So I would say that if you're trying to launch new IP, especially if you're more of a AA or indie class game, that I think the lower the price of your game, the better, because there's going to be much less of a barrier to entry, and you have a better shot at blowing up, because a lot more people are going to be able to try that out and not see that as a barrier to entry. I think that pricing games at the $70 to $80 price point is extremely risky, and only the largest, most established franchises with like a built-in audience guaranteed ready to go should really risk that, because I do feel like that's risky at this point. What I would be interested in seeing is if any of these big games, like I said, these launched at 70, would any of these companies be willing to try out a lower price point, like come out at like $39.99 or something like that, and see if they just get some massive amount of sales off of that. It's going to be hard again, because that's still not an A/B test, but that's really the hardest thing about all of this. And I think that's where these video game executives and decision makers are kind of having to think pretty hard about this, right? Because obviously there's a lot more to Clair Obscur Expedition 33's success than its launch price. But it's definitely true that the launch price of a game has puts up a barrier to entry. So if you want to blow up, having too high of a price can certainly cause some problems. And the data absolutely shows that you don't need a high price in order to generate high levels of revenue. So the exact relationship, though, on if game title X launches at this price versus that price, how many more sales does it get for lowering the price? That's just data we don't have because you can't try the same game twice. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this situation. You could let me know what you think. And I hope all of you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and have an excellent day.